So again, I do want to thank you all for being here. Um, it is really an honor and a privilege um, to spend time with parents, caregivers, and community members alike. Um, my name is Ryan Fuentes. I am a social worker and a consultant, educational consultant, specifically as it relates to anti-racism and equity in schools. I am also the program coordinator for the Plug Project, which I will be speaking on today. Now, the Plug Project, just to give a quick overview here before we get started, is a partnership between Taibu Community Health Center and Rexdale Community Health Center. I do want to say a few words about Taibu. Taibu Community Health Center is a multidisciplinary, community-led, non-for-profit organization, which was established to serve primarily the Black community across the GTA, recognizing that there are access issues within our system, our education system, our employment system, and our healthcare system. Taibu offers primary care, health promotion, youth, and community services. And Rexdale Community Health Center is essentially um, Taibu in many ways, but for the west part of the city. Taibu is located in the east in Scarborough, and Rexdale um, in the west part of the city. Now, um, I am also, interestingly enough, a TDSB graduate. Um, I have a history of experiencing and also combating anti-Black racism in schools. And for, I would say, about 10 years now, I have really dedicated my life to bridging the gap, the cultural gap between Black and racialized communities and the school system, and really working to ensure the success and well-being of all students, including our Black and racialized students. Now, the Plug Project specifically, um, it is designed to address disciplinary measures in schools. Um, and part of it is grounded in the research that Dr. Carl James did in the Towards Race Equity report, which really found that Black students in particular, racialized as well, are disproportionately represented across the 5 measures of success. Um, and one of those is a disproportionate number of suspensions and expulsions. And before sort of my inception, the Plug Project has been successful in working with youth and families that identify as Black and racialized to help them successfully navigate the education system. And specifically, we've been able to reduce suspensions and expulsions by 85%. And I will speak more to those issues and how sort of the Plug Project can support Black and racialized families, but also community workers um, and parents that that care about the success and well-being of all students. So I do want to begin by thanking the Almighty, and I'd like to also thank um, yourselves. Thank thank nature, thank the energies, um, and I also want to thank our indigenous ancestors. Many of us, when we woke up or went to bed last night, we forgot we were on indigenous land. So I do want to acknowledge that. And also, I would like to acknowledge our African ancestors, whose contributions and inventions have really supported us all and provided freedom for us all and social justice for us all. So I just want to begin by doing sort of a little bit of an ancestral blessing. Our great African ancestors who are among us, we humbly offer our thanks for the many blessings you have given. We extend our love to its ultimate state of being, for the suffering that you have endured, so that we may not suffer so. Mothers of our great African nation, fathers of our African selves, we invoke you to further lead and guide us to a higher understanding of true greatness and a more encompassing dedication of love. Parents of all African children, guide us toward a greater unity. Guide us in a stronger value system and lead us into the zenith of respect and love for all people through education and the family communal structure. We swear upon the heritage and legacy that you have left us to uphold and sustain our rightful status on this earth and to continue the struggle for the total mental and physical liberation of all African people. We ask that you bless this workshop and aid us in continuing the work you have started. Guide us, empower us, and fill us with your love. Now, I will say that as I'm sharing the screen, I cannot see the comments, but we do have a TDSB member who I will ask to sort of monitor the comments. And then I have also designed this workshop in a way to leave us at least 15 or 20 or so minutes for any questions, any thoughts, any comments. And so if those do come up, please put them in the chat and we will look to attend to them at the end. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of a warm-up activity. Those who can, if you believe the statement is a myth or false, take a step back. If you believe the statement is true, take a step forward. And if you are unsure or it depends, stay in the same spot. Now, you know, it is Sunday. I was hoping for us to get a little bit of activity, a little engagement. For those who can move, if you cannot move and you think that the statement is false, just, I guess, put a thumbs down or put false into the chat. If you believe the statement is true, put a thumbs up or put true into the chat. And if you are unsure, then I guess don't do anything at all. So here is the statement. If I am suspended and think it is unfair, I can advocate and appeal to have it removed from my Ontario student record. So again, if you think this is true, take a step forward or give me a thumbs back, a thumbs up, sorry. Okay, I see a thumbs up. If you think it is false, give me a thumbs down. And if you are unsure, then don't do anything at all. You can also put it into the chat. Okay. So, yes, I see another thumbs up. Great. So if you think that you have been suspended unfairly or believe the consequences are too harsh, you are able to appeal the suspension. This is true. All suspensions can be appealed to the school board. Written notice of the request for an appeal must be sent to the supervisory officer of the board within 10 school days of the start of the suspension. Excuse me. All right. Okay. So our partners and funders, as I mentioned, our partners is Rexdale Community Health Center, Taibu Community Health Center. Our funders is Legal Aid Ontario and the Ministry of Public Safety Canada. So I am a big believer in storytelling. um, and Afrocentricity, and also ancestral knowledge. Um, I also conducted my major research paper, sort of my mini thesis on the experiences and perspectives of Black parents with children in the TDSB. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing Black parents, and I wanted to share a quick story um, that one of the parents shared with me, Bridge, and this is not her real name, this is her pseudonym. And so Bridge, so again, sorry, let me take a step back. The criteria to participate in this study is that you had to identify as Black and you had to have children that have graduated from a TDSB school, okay? So Bridge was telling me a story about her daughter who is Black, and got in an altercation with another white student. They had a disagreement, and after school came, this was pre-pandemic, of course, and actually many, many years ago because they have already graduated. And what happened is, and many times in high school, especially this happens, where, one student is looking for the other student after school. So Bridget's daughter was looking for the white student after school, and a trail of students were following um, Bridget's daughter. And so a white middle class teacher saw this and immediately reported it to the principal, um, and they issued a suspension. And the terms were that the teacher had actually called um, the Bridge and said that your daughter is being suspended because she is in a gang. And so Bridge, in knowing her daughter, and this highlights the importance of where really parents and caregivers and community members to know their children, right? Um, she knew that her daughter was not in a gang, and so she called the teacher racist. The teacher broke down and started crying. A notice of the suspension, which is mandatory for the school to issue, was sent to the parent with a phone number to the supervisory officer, a contact information to the supervisory officer to appeal. And so Bridge did end up appealing the suspension, and the suspension was removed completely due to unfair mitigating factors and evidence that was presented later on. And so a few months later, what ended up happening is that the white middle class teacher called Bridge and apologized and said, "You were right. We unlawfully accused your daughter of being in a gang, and it turns out that the white student was actually the one that also, had participated in other sort of mischievous activities. One of which she stole a headstone from a cemetery." And so I bring this story because in my research with parents and in my work with parents, what I've really learned is that parent engagement, parent advocacy, and parent resiliency is essential to help your children navigate. So I do want to, sort of speak to the height of the issue when we speak of the internal and external factors that affect Black and racialized children in school and in the very fabric of our society. So according to 2018 statistics, 8.5% of Toronto's population identifies as Black. In the child welfare system, 40.8% of children in care um, of the Toronto Children's Aid Society are born to Black parents. The unemployment rate for Black youth in Toronto and Ontario is 28%, which is almost 2 times higher than the national average. And the criminal justice system, Black male youth are overrepresented by 4 times compared with their representation among the general population. So what we see here is that because of whiteness, because of white supremacist logics, which have really done 2 things in dividing us and reinforcing white superiority, what we have is systems really working together, colluding, really it is collusion, to reinforce anti-Black racism in our society. The great thinker, writer, philosopher, W.E.B. Du Bois said, "A system cannot fail those it was never built to protect." So I do want to sort of use this as a jumping board to highlight the anti-Black racism that often in more cases than not leads to differential treatment and unfair outcomes for Black children. Continuing along here, just a brief statistical analysis of anti-Black racism in schools. Structured pathways or streaming. 53% of Black students, 81% of white, and 80% of other racialized students were in the academic program of study. Conversely, Black students were over twice as likely to be enrolled in the applied 39% program, 39% compared with 16% of white and 18% of other racialized students, and 3 times as likely to be in the essentials program, 9% versus 3% of white and other racialized students. Now we know that pathways determine outcomes for students. Determines whether they are going to college, it determines whether they're going to university, or whether they're going to the workplace. So it is very much linked, education is very much linked to employment and social and emotional well-being. It is also a social determinant of health and a human right. Now, graduation rates or push-out rates, as a Black scholar, George Day, likes to call it, which I think is a more appropriate term. Black students are almost twice as likely to have been pushed out, 20%, compared to white 11% and other racialized students 11%. Now, suspensions, which is going to be the bulk of our conversation today. By the time they finish high school, 42% of all Black students are suspended at least once. Just gonna give you guys a moment to really take that in. So by the time they finish high school, 42% of all Black students are suspended at least once. Compared with only 18% of white students and 18% of other racialized students. This information can be found in the Towards Race Equity in Education report, lead researcher Carl James and Tana Turner. Now, I also have to mention that these issues are not new. Anti-Black racism, as George Day says, is news, but it's nothing new. These issues have been highlighted in over 30 years ago in government reports. And oftentimes, I do a lot of equity work, specifically with educators and social workers, in many cases, white educators and white social workers. And I always pose the question for reflection here. Excuse me. When you look at these statistics, is something fundamentally and inherently wrong with our Black and racialized students? Are they less capable? Are they less intelligent? Are they inferior? Or is something fundamentally or inherently wrong with our education system and our teaching and learning practices. Because I truly believe it is either one or the other. And I think you guys can get a sense of where I stand on this issue. So not another statistic. I'm just going to gloss over this. Several studies have shown that Black students are disproportionately represented across the 5 measures of school success: lower graduation rates, higher dropouts or pushouts, lower levels of academic achievement, streaming into applied and special ed designations. And so, as much as, in education, we talk about, for example, social justice and transformative education, and equity, and we use these big words. Equity, when it comes down to it, is not giving every child the same thing, but it's giving every child what they need to be academically successful and socially, and psychologically successful, right? And this needs to be contextualized in colonization and in the history of enslavement of African peoples. So equity, in many ways, is a myth. So I want to sort of try to break down school disciplinary issues. It's a very layered issue. In many cases, trust, empathy, and communication is at the core, right here at the top. Very important. The doctor, the late Maya Angelou always said, and I paraphrase, students and children, they may not remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And so just looking at the center here, it's linked to student-teacher relationships and power imbalances, as I highlighted in my story. It's linked to the school environment. So what we're talking about is a lack of Black and racialized staff. We're actually talking about the physical space as well, in it not representing Black and racialized students. And we're also talking about teaching and learning strategies, in that the curriculum doesn't really address the lived experiences and perspectives of Black and racialized students, right? They have Black History Month, but what about all the other months? This insinuates that all the other months are White History Months. And even the history that you learn in many cases is the history after 1619, after enslaved Africans were brought to British North America, not before, when, when we were kings and queens. And it doesn't speak of the inventions and the contributions of African peoples across the globe. Now, this is also linked to, just under school environment, it's linked to parental status, parental support, and home life. Whether you're a single parent, whether you have to work 2 jobs, sometimes this creates challenges in your communication with the school and your ability to be present in the school. Obviously, at the bottom here, it's also linked to socioeconomic status. Excuse me. We know that um, the economy and class and income and poverty is linked to race, right? And so this is also, an issue that's related to school disciplinary issues. There are the individual students' needs, right? Where the individual students' needs might differ from the needs of, or the overall structure of the education system. We have stress factors. We have undiagnosed, misdiagnosed sort of children, which all impacts it. Out here, we have racism, we have employment, we have identity, the need to have more, Black books, for example, and to do more, empowerment and talk about Black joy and Black excellence with our children. Um, Mental health, of course, support is needed, especially during this pandemic and the isolation and all of the other challenges that it's revealed sort of in our healthcare system as well. And then just at the bottom here, legal representation is important in terms of, you know, advocating for yourselves, system navigation, and early identification and prevention. So what can the plug do for you, the plug project? So as I mentioned, the plug project is funded by the Federal Ministry of Public Safety and supported by Legal Aid Ontario. It is implemented primarily in the East and West regions of Toronto. The plug project works with students who self-identify as Black and or racialized and their parents and families to access really four things. One, current and factual information about school disciplinary processes, about the rights and responsibilities of students, parents, caregivers. Early identification of challenges and intervention. So we work with, parents, caregivers, students, and the school system, and sort of serve as a mediator to identify and mitigate challenges internally and externally early on. We also provide direct legal services that are free. This is important, including advice and direct representation at hearings and advocacy before the Child and Family Review Board. And lastly, access to wraparound community services. So we do this work with the intention of reaching sort of your goals. And we don't just do that and then sort of pull out. We offer continued supports and try to connect you to a community of supports ongoing for you to access the services and supports that you require. So the plug process, it's a 6-step process. So the first thing is that you would get connected to the plug. I'll leave my phone number at the end of the presentation, which is myself, by phone or by email. You would fill out some forms so that I can work with yourself and or your child. Step 3 is that we would work to develop an action plan in connection to the schools, but that is really student and family led, and that's very important. The goal of this plan, is to address your needs, and so whether it be academic success or social emotional well-being or both, then that's what we are working together to achieve. Step 4, again, we communicate with all involved stakeholders to determine if academic needs of student are fulfilled at school, safe school mediation, meeting suspension, and expulsion hearing reintegration meeting. Step 4 can be extended depending on the situation. Step 5 involves us looking at did we achieve the intended and planned outcomes, and what are sort of ways that we can improve, and what future sort of supports or services do we need to support you. Lastly, again, it's about us providing continued wraparound supports. And so we do intend to stay connected and always be available for youth and families and community members alike. So I just wanted to also, for this workshop, get into the Education Act. And specifically around suspensions and expulsions. And my aim is to try to sort of simplify the Education Act. So an overview of suspensions. Suspensions can really disrupt families. And that's why it's very important to care when your child is suspended. Because many arrangements oftentimes need to be made. You may have to stay home. You may have to provide daycare. Um, but suspensions also impact students. It could impact students in terms of their academic success. You know, when you think of certain subjects that may be more difficult for some students, like math and science, um, or English, um, you know, if you miss sometimes these things, they build the class sort of builds on one theme to the next. And so when you're suspended and you're not in school, sometimes it's very hard to get caught up. And also, I think suspensions have an impact on the psychology and well-being of students. And I think that's very important as well to think about when you're advocating for your child. Suspensions show up on the Ontario student record, and suspensions can be issued anywhere from 1 to 20 days. And again, if you feel or think that your child has been suspended unfairly or the punishments are too harsh, then you can appeal this and you can get lawyer and legal representation to help you appeal this. So, you know, the Education Act clearly states that the principal can suspend a child. And the prerequisite to do this is really in three cases. Not three cases, but sort of three school-related circumstances. So an activity that takes place at school, right? An activity that takes place off school property, like a field trip, or any activity that really impacts the school climate. So that's really broad. This could even be something like cyberbullying, for example. Okay, but that is a precursor to suspensions. So activities leading to possible suspension: threatening to seriously harm another person, possessing alcohol or illegal drugs. Now, it's important to note that if a student, for example, if it's in regards to something like marijuana, if they have a medical license, then obviously exceptions apply to the law here. Being under the influence of alcohol, swearing at a teacher or at another person in a position of authority, committing an act of vandalism that causes extensive damage to school property at the pupil school or to the property located on the premises of the pupil school, bullying, and any other activity that is an activity under a policy of the board. So generally there are policies that govern all boards, but in some cases there are fine details, specifics to each board. Now we are sort of in many boards are in a virtual environment. And so in my conversations with board members, there hasn't been a whole lot of suspensions. But in many cases, what happens is it has to do with how they are engaging with the virtual platform. And if they are saying something inappropriate and something of that nature, then that may lead to a suspension. So there are factors that a principal must consider when making this decision to suspend a student. Whether the student is able to control their behavior and understands the future consequences of their behavior, whether allowing the student to stay at school would put other students or teachers' safety at risk, whether a progressive discipline approach has been used with the student. So progressive discipline is a term that has been around for a while now in education. And this is just really the idea that, for example, has the school, has the principal, for example, tried to communicate with the parent? Have they tried to communicate with the student? Have they tried to differentiate their learning? Have they reviewed the policies with the students, with the parents? Have there been other measures put in place to try to mitigate these factors, but also to enforce punishment? Principals must also consider whether the activity that the student may be or is being suspended for uh, was related to any harassment because of the student's race, ethnic origin, or any sort of other aspect of your identity. So this is something that needs to be considered, right? Especially when we talk about anti-Black racism. Was this something that went into the decision of your child being suspended, right? Something to think about. The student's history is also something that needs to be considered. How the suspension would affect the student's ongoing education. And lastly, the age of the student. Now, continuing, in the case of a student who has an individual education plan that has been developed, the principal should also consider if the student's behavior was a result of this individual education plan, if there is a disability or a lack of ability that is identified in the student's IEP, the individual education plan. Has there been appropriate individualized accommodations that should have been provided? And also, is the suspension going to worsen the student's behavior? Something else that principals must consider in making this decision. And so there are activities that must lead to a suspension. It's mandatory suspension. So having a weapon, including a gun, using a weapon to cause or threaten harm to another person, physically harming another person so that person requires medical attention, sexually assaulting someone, selling weapons or illegal drugs, robbing someone, giving alcohol to a person under 19 years old, bullying if the student has previously been suspended for engaging in bullying, and the student's presence creates an unacceptable risk to the safety of another person at the school. So these are activities that must lead to a suspension. Any activity that was listed in the previous section that may lead to a possible suspension, not must lead, right? If the activity was motivated by a bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, then this is also something that must lead to a suspension. And also engaging in any other activity listed on the school board's policy that states suspension is mandatory. So what happens if a student is suspended? The principal must suspend the student from engaging in all school-related activities, including extracurricular activities, assign the student to a program for suspended students, and inform within 24 hours and promptly provide written notice of suspension to the student's parent or guardian, unless the student is 18 years of age or older, or the student is 16 or 17 and has withdrawn from parental control. This is very important. You must get a written notice of suspension. So in the notice of suspension, the principal must outline why the student was suspended, how long the suspension will last, what program the student will be assigned to. If the suspension is over 5 days, they will be assigned to a program. Information about the right to appeal, including a copy of the school board's policies and guidelines for appeals. Right, this is very important. So there should be information about how to appeal and contact your your supervisory officer. The name of the supervisory officer that the student can send any notice of appeal to, or parent or guardian. If the principal is considering possible expulsion, all of this must be in the notice of suspension. And if it is not, I highly recommend, if you did not receive a notice of a suspension, or this information is not in there, I highly recommend that you contact a lawyer. So I think the suspension is unfair. What are my options? The notice of intention to appeal must be in writing and must be delivered to the board supervisory officer within 5 days of the beginning of a suspension for activities that must lead to a suspension. So those are, including a weapon like a gun, or sexually assaulting someone, and within 10 days of the beginning of a suspension for activities that may lead to a suspension. So that were the activities of being under the influence, of swearing to a teacher, and those activities. If the student received a suspension pending an expulsion notice, they cannot appeal the suspension until after the principal has decided whether or not to recommend an expulsion. Okay. Now, if the principal recommends an expulsion, there will be a hearing where the board may confirm or remove the suspension or reduce its duration. Now, I will be sharing these slides with the organizers, which I thank dearly for allowing me to present. And don't feel like you have to screenshot everything or remember all of this information. I will make sure that this information is accessible. Now, I also want to mention that at these suspension and expulsion hearings, it is very similar to a courtroom, in a sense that what you will have is you will have school board trustees, usually at least about 3 of them. They may have a lawyer. Most cases they do. The principal will be there as well, who also can have a lawyer. And then the student being suspended, if they are 18 years or older, 16 or 17 and have withdrawn from parent control, or the parent the parent guardian, and you do have some rights. You do have some rights in this situation. You can have your lawyer there. The student is allowed to present sort of their ideas around the case. Witnesses can be presented. You can also cross-examine witnesses. And overall, any mitigating circumstances that should be considered can be presented. So what does being expelled mean? Being expelled means you will be removed from your school indefinitely. It's a very severe form of discipline and should only be used in more severe instances. So there are 2 types of expulsions: being expelled from homeschool, which includes extracurricular activities, and then being expelled from the entire school board, right? Which also includes extracurricular activities. And then you would also be recommended to a expulsion program. Now you can try to apply to another school board, but they will know that the student has been expelled and may require the student to complete the expulsion program. So as we sort of, I'm recognizing the time, as we sort of closely get to the wrap up, I have a few more slides and then a short video. The principal must conduct an investigation promptly following a student being suspended. In line with the board policy, the principal must make all reasonable efforts to speak with the student and parent or guardian where applicable. The principal should say who they spoke to during the investigation. If the report does not include these names and a summary of what they said, the student should ask for this information. So prior to the hearing, the student will be given the notice of recommendation to expel, as well as a copy of the principal's report, a copy of the school board's policies and procedures, and what the possible outcomes of an expulsion hearing are. And again, if you have not received this information, it's very important you ask for this information. And I do highly recommend that you get support from the lawyer. Expulsion hearings must be held within 20 school days of the original suspension, unless both parties agree to an extension. If more than 20 school days have passed without a hearing or an agreement to extend the deadline, there can no longer be an expulsion, and the student is free to return to school. Speak to a lawyer as well if you're asked to do an extension. And it's also important to remember that at these hearings, if they have ruled a child, then there's nothing at this point that the school board can do. So what do I do if I don't agree with the school board decision? It can still be appealed at the Child and Family Services Review Board. It has to happen within 30 days after the date on which the decision was received. The board may grant an extension of time for written notice of appeal if it is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds for this extension. Just a quote by activist Asada Shakur: no one is going to give you the education you need to overthrow them. Nobody is going to teach you your true history, teach you your true heroes, if they know that that knowledge will help set you free. Powerful statement by Asada Shakur. Some parent caregiver resources. So the engaged parent navigating the school system, the Faculty of Education, the Jean Augustine Chair, has created a document for Black parents, which highlights from pre-K to grade 12, things that parents can do to be engaged, to be resilient, to be present. Things like starting a parent support group, communicating with teachers through the school planner, doing unannounced visits to the school, and sort of a little information on IEPs. And I think it's a great resource for parents. Also, if you Google Child and Family Services Review Board Tribunals Ontario, that is a link to the form that I mentioned, that, after an expulsion hearing, if you don't agree and you would still like to advocate, that is the form that you would fill out. And then the information I presented on today was the Towards Race, Equity, and Education, the schooling of Black students, the Greater Toronto Area. And in the Greater Toronto Area, Carl James and Tana Turner. This information can be Googled. So here is my contact information: program coordinator, the manager of community services systems change, Phil Johnson, the manager of youth and family services at Rexdale, Tanya Iskirski. Feel free to take a screenshot if you found this information useful. And again, I will be sharing my slides. Just wanted to end with sort of a short video.
And I just recommend, there's only 5 minutes left, so maybe opening it up.
Okay.
If that would be okay.
Sure. Yes, that sounds good. Let's open it up.
If there are
So
any...
are there any questions, comments? I'll open up the chat as well.
So one of the questions is there a specific location in the Jane and Finch area?
A specific location for the plug project?
Yes.
So the plug project can support in the east and west regions of Toronto. And so Jane and Finch would, I believe, it's not exactly the west end, but it's sort of a neighboring area. So we would be able to support individuals from the Jane community. Are there any other questions in the chat I'm having? Are there any other questions in the chat?
So if the student is put in an expelled program, how can students be reintegrated back into mainstream school?
Okay. So generally, there's two ways that I know of, and the TDSB can also speak on their experience. But it would involve completion of the expulsion program, um, or advocacy prior to the expulsion, right, to sort of mitigate the expulsion. And then the third thing would be looking at other boards to see if you are accepted in another board. Are there any other questions in the chat? For some reason at TDSB, I can't actually view the chat for some reason. So I'm not able to see if there are questions in the chat.
Do you work with the criminal justice system, like students on bail or are awaiting trial? How can these students be supported through your students?
Um,
Sorry, by
so
your program, how can these
yeah,
students?
no worries. So definitely, I mean, the education system is very much interconnected with the criminal justice system, in the school sort of to prison pipeline. And so we have a lawyer, Sheldon, um, who is a wonderful man, a Black man who really understands the issues. And so as long as the involvement in the criminal justice system is related to education, then we are able to support, because we essentially work with Black and racialized youth and families, um, uh, within sort of the parameters of the Education Act and the internal and external factors that lead to sort of contact with the law. And so there's a lot of early prevention stuff that we do, like myself as a social worker and working with youth, parents, and the school system. And then Sheldon as well, in terms of, early intervention from preventing sort of suspensions and expulsions. And then when they do happen, getting involved if it's been issued unfairly or it's been too harsh, to help reduce or remove those suspensions and expulsions. And I mentioned we've been able to successfully do that with 85% of our cases. Are there any other questions?
Just wanted to point, I'm sorry. Just wanted to point out the TDSB does have a link to the plug program on their website, and I included it in the chat.
Okay, wonderful.
Do students have info about the program to share with, do schools have info about the program to share with students and parents?
So we do have a partnership with a few school boards, the TDSB included, um, as well as the Durham Catholic Board and a few other school boards. Now, yes, so this information is accessible. I will again be sharing my slides with the organizers of the TDSB. Um, and this information is out there, but we continue to work to build partnerships across school boards, recognizing that this is an issue within all school boards. And so ensuring that the plug project information is accessible within our school boards. So yes, and if it is not, then it's something that we continue to make connections to make sure that it is accessible to you. And there's also my contact information that was included there in the last slide. So I am available to connect as well for more information and resources. Any last few questions? I do recognize the time. I know it is now folks' break, perhaps lunch.
Are you able to go back to the last slide that has your contact info and details?
Yes. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, there it is. And I did also have a short video that I can share with the TDSB. We did get started a little late. I wanted folks to get an opportunity to log in.
Ryan, very quick question.
Yes.
Is Carl James working with you on as part of this program, the Plug Project?
So he his research very much informed the project. And he is also part of the evaluation team for the project.
Okay, fantastic.
So he will be working with others, yes, to evaluate it.
Very good. We go back a little while.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known him for a few years.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. Yeah, he's definitely a mentor.
Yeah, he's
And
a fantastic person.
Yeah, and a colleague of mine. Yes.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm. TDSB, is there any other final questions?
I think that's all the questions in the chat, Ryan.
Okay. Is it okay, like, if folks, I have a 3 or 4 minute video that kind of wraps everything up. Is it okay if I show that?
I think if people want to stay online, they will. And if they have to go, they can go.
Okay, that's wonderful then. So I will show it. And if you want to and can stay online, please do. But it was really an honor and a pleasure to present to you. And I look forward to, hearing about the success of your children and of the work that you continue to do. So thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share this video. So can somebody tell me can they see my screen right now, the video?
Not seeing the video. I still see your screen share with the last slide.
Oh, that's what you're seeing right now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so the video for some reason is not showing up. All right. So you couldn't see my video there, right? Right. Okay. It's not working. It wasn't allowing me to drop it into the presentation because of the file. It's just Murphy's Law, I guess. What can go wrong will go wrong. But I will look to share this video. It's just sort of a wrap up of the plug project for parents and caregivers and community members. I will share it with the TDSB so that it is accessible once I change the formatting for it and can do so. Okay. I want to thank you all for participating. And I ask that you guys enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and enjoy the rest of the event if you are going to be participating. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, it was great.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it was informative.
It was, absolutely.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And stay in touch, and I'll definitely keep you posted if I see things too. I'll send them your way.
Okay. Sorry, who is it that I'm speaking to right now?
Chelsea.
Ah, Chelsea. Okay. Is there okay, wonderful. So was it okay, Chelsea?
It was great. That was
Okay, wonderful. That means a lot coming from you, Chelsea, I have to say.
yeah, no, it was a lot of
Yes, thank you. Sorry?
I said it was really useful information, I think, for the people who are online.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, Chelsea, and we'll stay connected.
For sure.
Thank you again for the opportunity. Thank Margaret and Michelle Monroe and Michelle Davis as well.
Okay, wonderful. I will.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Bye.